Good afternoon, my name's Nick Ward, and I'm a World War I battlefield guide and researcher. And usually what I really do is I research individuals that families have asked me to look at. I look at them very, very deeply, and then we go to the Western Front and we follow in their muddy footprints. I'm also the author of this book, The Troopship Mendi, The Black Titanic, but I didn't set out specifically research the story. The story actually, the Mendi, actually found me. I'm sure you're all familiar with the tragedy of the troopship Mendi on the 21st of February 1917. She was coming up from Cape Town. She just stopped on in Plymouth and was on the final leg of her journey to Le Havre, and she was hit by another British ship, the Darrow. She sank within 25 minutes with a loss of 646 native South Africans, white officers, and 30 crew. Now, people are quite interested. How did I come into the story? Completely by chance. I was doing a lot of research at home in my hometown of Littlehampton in West Sussex on the coast, and I was looking for soldiers that came back from the horrors of the war and have died of their wounds. Now, there is a Commonwealth War Graves Commission plot at Littlehampton, but also around the cemetery, and there's a good number of them, are individual CWGC graves. And they've ended up there because the families wanted to have their own grave to look after rather than them going in the CWGC plot. So they're scattered around here and there. So I can see a headstone, a Commonwealth War Graves Commission headstone at 100 yards. So I would follow them around, take their details, and go back and add them to my database and my research. And then I turned a corner and I saw a headstone that had no right to be in my cemetery. And had the Springbok motif and three names who obviously were not British. Now, as a local historian, I knew no South Africans were ever in my part of the world. So then I thought, well, why are you here? So, of course, as soon as I did, I went back and looked at the Commission's database. And then it quickly became apparent that this tragedy of the Mendi. So I thought, well, there's going to be a lot of stuff to read up on this. Mr. Google, however, said no. So this intrigued me. So I wanted to know more about this baffling grave with three men within it. So I went to my local archives, county archives, and went through their microfiche for newspapers. And there I found a coroner's report for not only the three blacks, but it turned out to be a white man as well. Basically what happened, a tramp steamer came out of Littlehampton. This is 8 days after the sinking, and they found a life raft with three black South African native labour corps labourers and one white man. The white man turned out to be the ship's baker from a letter in his pocket, and his body was sent back to Bootle in Liverpool. The three blacks were interred. So that started so many mysteries for me. So the more I dug, the more mysteries I found. And why was there so little documented about the Mendi? So it took me 6 years, and back in the day when I found this grave in 2010, a lot of the stuff that the National Archives hold, county archives and other archives, hadn't been digitised, and it's still happening, it's ongoing. So never give up that, oh, it's not on the internet, it doesn't exist. Sometimes you have to go and put your bums on seats. And in my case back in the day, it was Kew, county archives, newspaper archives, writing to newspaper in South Africa, any way I possibly think. So eventually, I did get to the end of my book, but it probably isn't, because there is more information out there, buried in these archives all around the world. But it's a question of when they're brought into being. And it takes an awful long time for a big commission, like the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, to the ongoing information upload. So again, don't give up hope. think out the box and keep nagging people, ring people up at certain archives. And the internet is a great place for networking, and you'd be surprised that you can get some results. Now, I've lost my assistant. Would you want to do it for me? A South African, I prefer a South African reads these two things. Three things. This is a poem, 1917 by Mackay, and then and Becky's thoughts on it, which you see the importance of that poem later on to the ANC.
Want to read now?
Yes, please.
1917, farewell. And so leave our shores, my peers, for France. Remind yourselves of the poverty you leave behind. Defeat the temptations of the ruthless Satan, because you are where you are today as our offering. You go as the sacred sacrifice of the African nation. And so forward, offspring of the cow of the long udder. Forward, calves of teats lengthened by sharing. Advance, because the times decreed that this had to be. The God of our forefathers has gone on ahead of you. March on, your legs free of cramps. Move on, your hearts free of the fear of cowards, with a light step, and bodies drilled for brave deeds. Advance, advance, advance. Left, right, left, right, left, 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 halt. And that was by S.E.K. Mackay.
Do you want to read 80 years later?
80 years later by Thabo Mbeki. More than 90 years ago, the poet laureate S.E.K. Mackay commanded that those who had the responsibility to fight for peace and freedom had to do so with hearts free of cowardice, ready to make the supreme sacrifice for the poor of our land and the assertion of the dignity of the African people, as true products of the African mother who had freely given her milk, even to the motherless calf. This surely must be the part of the heritage on which we raise our new nation that is striving to be born. Thabo Mbeki.
You can do this one in a second. But thank you very much. So you can see the importance back in 1917 when they were sending their young black labourers to war. And you can see the importance it was when Mandela came into power, because the first thing he did in 1904 was he had the Mendi Medal struck, which is the equivalent of our Victoria Cross. It's the highest award for valour in South Africa. Also, 2 of his ships were renamed after the Reverend Wauchope. And also in 1995, he opened jointly with Queen Elizabeth II the Soweto Memorial. So huge importance in all sorts of ways, the sacrifice of the South African Native Labour Corps. I usually get quite a few questions. My normal spiel, if you like, goes on about an hour, but I won't keep you an hour. But I have researched hundreds of documents, literally, and painstaking with the Mendi, very, very difficult. But one day I had a breakthrough, and I found an archive forgotten in Witwatersrand University, which was a little gold mine. And in it, there was, in 1940, there was a church service in South Africa for the 23rd anniversary. And at this ceremony, they were selling souvenir booklets with all sorts of information in for $1. And that $1 was going to the Mendi Foundation to help the children and relatives of the dead. And it's a survivors report. And Captain Lewis Eccles-Hertz, that he was a British medical officer on board the Mendi when it sank. And he stood up and said of what happened that morning at 5:03 on the 21st of February. Do you want to read that one?
Have you read this?
Yes. All right. Nick, you might as well finish that. Do you want to read the... Go on, Christine. This is a survivor's report.
Okay, I'm going to try to read it in African verse. Okay?
Just read it.
Yeah. The memory of the cold, foggy morning
is still keen in my mind. Though 23 years have now passed, I hear the crash as the other ship ran into us in the darkness. I see the officer in charge of the Bantu, who thought only of his men and their safety, go running around all the sleeping places shouting, all on deck. I see hundreds of them coming up quickly and quietly from below, and each man finding his own appointed place on deck. Notwithstanding the blackness of the night, there is no fear or panic. They put on their clothes and life belts as they fall into position. Each man has used his life belt as a pillow during the night. I'm hearing the warning hoots of the steamer, and standing on the deck, I see two boats being lowered into the sea alongside us. I feel the heavy lids of the ship as the water begins to fill her, and she turns slowly on her side so that we cannot stand on deck. I hear the shout, all overboard, she's sinking. And every man who can do so jumps. I remember the jump into the bitter cold sea, the sinking beneath the surface, and the coming up again, the swim into the boat that had been let down for our ship, and then caught adrift. I feel my hands gripping her side as our rowers drew alongside us. I hear myself say, goodbye, my strength is gone. And then I feel strong hands of a native gripping my wrist and holding me up. Then several others catch me around the chest and shoulders and drag me, nearly dead, into the boat, and so I am saved. Nearly 200 others were also saved, and all of us who were still alive remember with you today the Bantu and Europeans who went bravely to meet their deaths on that black day of the last war. On Sunday the 21st, I shall stand in my house at 4 o'clock and join with you in saluting their memory. Our salutation is a pledge of our loyalty to the government of our country, to our king, and to the empire to which we all belong.
Well done. A very moving account. In actual fact, since 1940, Christine, you are now probably about the 10th person that's ever said it in public. A remarkable thing because of the lack of information. I'm sure, are you all familiar with the legend of the death drill? Yes. I'm sure you are. When you ask me questions, I'll answer it first before you ask me, do I believe the death drill happened on that canting deck? My head says no, my heart says yes.